Culture was really born of the imagination, and the human imagination, as we know it, arose in the distant past when our species, Homo sapiens, evolved from its direct ancestor, Homo erectus, and somehow, infused by the spark of consciousness, embarked on a journey that would carry it to every corner of the habitable world. And the sophistication of the art at all of the Upper Paleolithic caves from Chauvet, 32,000 years before the Christian era, to Lascaux, roughly 17,000 years before the Christian era, is astonishing not only for its transcendent beauty, but for the fact that it tells us something very deeply profound about the fluorescence of the human potential once brought into being by culture. The cave art does much more than invoke the magic of the hunt. It in fact pays homage to that moment in time when human beings, through consciousness, separated themselves from the animal realm, emerging as a very unique entity that we are today, whether we like it or not. And viewed in this light, you can almost see the art as postcards of nostalgia, as an attempt of a conscious species to reach back across a chasm that was irrevocable and unbridgeable to a distant time of our animal nature. And it also marked the beginning of our discontent, the restless yearning for meaning and understanding that has ever since then propelled the human spirit. Our entire existential experience as a species over the last 50,000 years can really be distilled into two words: how and why. How, the query of science; why, the pursuit of religion. And these 2 points of inquiry became the slivers of insight around which cultures were crystallized. I mean, the fascinating thing about anthropology is that we all share the same adaptive imperatives. After all, every culture must give birth to its children, educate those children, find ways for adults to come together to couple that are consistent and solid. Every culture has to deal with death and the inexorable mystery that death implies. But given that commonality of need, it's just simply extraordinary, the range of blossoms that have bloomed in the garden of the human experience. Because in the last generation, biologists and geneticists have proven it to be true, something that philosophers have always hoped to be true, and that is that we're all brothers and sisters. And I don't mean that in the spirit of hippie ethnography. I mean quite literally, we are cut from the same genetic cloth. Studies of the human genetic genome leave no doubt that the genetic endowment of humanity is a continuum. And ironically, given that anthropology and biology were for a generation at odds with each other, nurture versus nature, this revelation of hard science has more than anything else affirmed the central tenet of anthropology, the central revelation of anthropology, and that is the idea that the world into which you are born does not exist in some absolute sense, but is just one model of reality, the consequence of one particular set of adaptive choices that your lineage made, however successfully, many generations ago. Because every culture, by definition, has something to say. Every culture deserves a place at the council of human wisdom and knowledge. But the challenge is, what do we do about it? You know, if you are concerned, for example, with the loss of biological diversity, and you can identify an area of high species endemism, you can create a protected area, a national park. But you can't create a protected area of the mind. You can't freeze people in time like some kind of zoological specimen. Change is the one constant in history. All populations, all cultures are always dancing with new possibilities for life. And we also have to ask ourselves in closing, what kind of world do we want to live in? A monochromatic world of monotony, or celebrate a polychromatic world of diversity? You know, none of us as anthropologists are talking about freezing people in time. On the contrary, the entire question is, how are we going to find a way together to live in a multicultural world of pluralism? It's not the traditional versus the modern. It's the rights of free people to choose the components of their lives. It's not about denying the genius of modernity to any people, or it's certainly not about the people of the modern world, quote unquote, going back to a pre-industrial state. It's how do we find a way that all peoples can benefit from the very best of the modern, critically, without that engagement, having to demand a death of their ethnicity. Because if there's one thing that anthropology teaches, it's that culture is not trivial. And that's why fundamentally this is such a profoundly conservative message. Culture is not decorative. It's not feathers and bells and songs and prayers. Ultimately, culture in any society is a body of moral and ethical values that we place around each individual to keep at bay the barbaric heart that history teaches us sadly lies within the surface of all of us. It is culture that allows us to do, as Lincoln said, reach for the better angels of our nature. And when I was asked to do the Massey lectures that inspired this book, The Wayfinders, the editors put on a final title, subtitle, Why Ancient Wisdom Matters in the Modern World, forcing me to answer that question, which I did implicitly through that book, as I hope I have done tonight through this lecture. But when I really came to answer it specifically, I did so with two words: climate change. Not to suggest that we go back to some pre-industrial past or that anything of the modern world be kept from indigenous people, but rather to recognize that when you do travel into the Arctic, the melting ice is so severe that it's beyond comprehension. I'm the Canadian head of Lindblad Expeditions. We are now planning tours of the Northwest Passage through areas of land that were unnavigable as recently as 3 years ago. The melting ice is everywhere. It is simply gone. And I think when I answered that question that way, what I was really trying to say is that the very existence of these diverse visions of reality, these 10,000 different ways of being, show to us that there really are indeed alternatives. And the critical thing is they put the lie to those who say that we're on a train wreck that we cannot get off, that the tracks are carrying us inexorably. We cannot get off this track of destruction. And they put the lie to those who say that we cannot change, as we all fundamentally know we must change the essential way in which we interact with this single blue planet as it spins through the velvet void of space. In the end, we need the hopes and dreams of these kids, these monks, this wonderful young lad I met on the Serengeti Plain not a year ago, because for all time, their hopes and dreams become part of our collective geography of hope as we move forward into a new era with a more sensitive set of relationships and spiritual practices on the planet. Thank you very much.